talking about journeys, destinations, culture, adventure, gear, conservation, and all the things we haven't yet thought of. This episode is brought to you by Sunwear Solar Technology, a premium manufacturer of fixed and portable solar panels for overlanding vehicles and marine applications. Designed and manufactured in Germany, Sunwear panels are tested under the harshest environmental conditions to ensure rugged reliability for years to come. Trust Sunwear for your solar energy needs, no matter where your adventures take you. Check out their website at sunwear.solar. You'll find the link in the description below. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to another episode of the At Overland Europe podcast. I think it's fair to say that my guest today is indirectly connected to the overlanding world, but intimately involved with some of the vehicles we love and rely upon when we're out and about exploring the world. He runs a thriving restoration business, manages a popular YouTube channel, and, when he's not wielding his tools, isn't impartial to British ale or a gin and tonic. My guest's name is Richard Hudson, aka Church House Classics, and he's an expert when it comes to Range Rover Classics, Series Land Rovers, MGBs and Triumph Stags. Unsurprisingly, I first ran into Richard on YouTube. I watched one of his videos and promptly ended up binge-watching the series about Bob. You're going to have to check out his channel if you want to know more. Needless to say, it was Richard's authenticity, wisdom and unique sense of humour, including his impersonation of seals, that had me glued to the screen. Some would say his workshop is untidy and his language is colourful. The man calls a spade a spade. But Richard possesses an uncanny skill to take the wizardry and mystery of mechanics and bodywork and turn them into an entertaining and compelling video series packed with a wealth of hands-on experience. Oh, Richard was also featured in the January 2025 edition of that equally wonderful magazine, Land Rover Monthly. So, enough of the intro. Welcome, Richard.
So I got involved with cabling. Right, there comes my wife. I don't know if you heard the door slam.
I did.
You did. I think the neighbours heard it. We're doing a recording at the moment. Right, okay. Hello, Mike. Thank you.
Good to see you and hear you.
And you. And hear you. Finally, with microphones all sorted out now.
Indeed. But I tell you what, let's get this off to a start. I'm sure there are quite a few listeners out there who don't actually know Richard Hudson or Church House Classics. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Okay, well, I'm Richard Hudson. I live in the UK, southeast corner, and I set up a business, Church House Classics, in 2018, predominantly to work with two-door Range Rover Classics. At that time, the market was buoyant and the prices were high, and I figured I could make a business out of this. But as the market has settled down, my business is now involved into working on pretty much any classic car, mainly British classic cars, but any classic car that kind of takes my fancy, offering a number of services right the way from, helping an owner understand what it is like to drive a classic car versus a brand spanking new saloon, right the way through to a complete nut and bolt restoration and everything in between. And it's, for me, this is something that I've been doing pretty much all my life. I won't even say adult life, because this particular trend evolved as I was growing up. Certainly in my pre-teen years, I was very keen to just tear things apart to find out how they worked. And if I can get them back together again and they worked again, that was a real bonus. Then I tear them apart again to find out, oh, okay, if they didn't work, it gave me even more opportunity to understand. And it was just a curiosity to understand how machines operate. I suppose in the early 1980s, and I was in my mid-teens at that point, I got into mechanical engineering rather than clocks and cameras and things like that. So I got into bigger scale things, and that really started off with lawnmowers, 4-stroke lawnmowers, Suffolk Colts and Suffolk Punches, because everyone at that point in suburbia, South London, was rushing around and buying new rotary lawnmowers because they were the new thing to have. And of course, they were getting rid of their old cylinder Suffolk Punches and Colts. My dad quite liked them, so we had about 4 or 5 in the back garden. And I just started pulling them apart. Got myself a little socket set, it was a Christmas present. I think my grandfather sorted that out for me. But yes, it was just a case of just pulling things apart, to the perpetual frustration of my dad every time he wanted to cut the grass. There was never a lawnmower that actually started. And I got them all working in the end. But this interest really, and again, this is before I did my O-level qualifications, my basic education qualifications. So I'd have been about 14 or 15 or so. I had friends that were lucky enough to have the space to buy a car, an old wreck. And I'd just be permanently living in their garage. We'd find out how a gearbox worked by pulling the main shaft out of it and letting everything clatter into a box on the floor. And then thinking, oh, right, okay, this is interesting. How do we get this back together again? Understood very quickly how an engine operated, a four-stroke engine. For me, there's nothing more interesting than looking at a technical diagram of a machine.
I love exploded drawings.
Oh, indeed, yeah. So things like even the very basic diagrams on the front cover of a workshop manual of a cutaway drawing. Spent hours looking at them, looking at all the details. Oh, I hadn't noticed that before. And I think it's just that's my background. That's the basis of me. Now, as I was growing up in the mid-1980s, left school, didn't go on to further education because it wasn't mandatory in those days, as it is now. And I think that was lucky for me. I mean, I've got three sons. They've all been through further education, been right the way through to extended university education. I'd done very well for it. But they couldn't have followed the career path that I followed without that. So I left school with a bunch of O-levels and passed out of my A-levels because I saw all my friends buzzing around in cars, had money, had jobs, could afford to go to the pub. And I was stuck in a sixth form college doing A-levels, maths, further maths and physics. I really did want to. That was a couple of really good kind of punches to the groin when I took on those three subjects. They were tough. I got to the S-levels and I thought, what am I doing with my life here? So I quit and got a job with a bank, believe it or not. Okay. When I got that job, I just applied everywhere, got the job. And my boys don't understand. Well, how did you get a job then? Did you go on the internet? Didn't exist then. Computers barely existed. I would say computers, personal computing was in its very, very, very infancy. It was right at the beginning of that particular path of technology. So it was often a case of going through trade papers, newspapers, Exchange and Mart, looking for jobs in printed press. And I got two or three job offers. The first one was a really interesting one, and that was a civil engineering company that I was really keen on. Oh, civil engineering! This is something that could excite me. But it was a very small business, and there was no real clear progression there. And I've been there for a couple of months, and I got offered two jobs by two different banks to work for them. And at that time, and we're talking 1984, 85, everyone in the family was like, oh my goodness, that is brilliant. You have a job for life there. Working in a bank, you have a job for life. Right, okay, well, I'll go with that then. Well, within 2 years, the entire banking sector had completely changed, moved away from the hundreds of years old mechanism of having a senior manager working in a branch and everything was very formal and structured, to being it just completely changed. Everything changed. There was no longer a job for life within 2 years. And I'd become disillusioned with banking anyway. I couldn't get the company I was working for, I couldn't get them to fund my banking exam tuition, which I ended up funding myself and doing at night classes. So I got myself a BTEC diploma in business studies at night classes, which was blooming hard work, but I did it. And it was after I got that I thought, you know what, I've had enough of this. Now, my dad at the time was working for the Ministry of Defence and was very much involved in computers and acquisitions of computers and testing how personal computing might work in the MOD at that time. So he was often bringing these things home. He brought home it wasn't the Commodore PET, it was the Commodore that came after the PET. Someone will probably be shouting at the radio right now saying, oh yeah, it was so-and-so. But it was a Commodore, and then I had one of the first Amstrads that came out, personal computers. Oh, wow. It ran on two 5 1/4 inch floppy disk drives. And I got into programming. oh, I quite like this game, this programming game. And because of my dad's connections within the computer dealer networks at that particular time, I said to him, Dad, I'm looking for another job. He said, great, I'll have a chat with a few people, see what I can find. And I ended up getting a job with a small computer reseller based in Twickenham. The job was literally to walk around with a pick sheet and pick consumables off a shelf. Okay, so plotter pens, ink cartridges, paper packs, bits of ribbons for printers. And we were going real kind of old basic stuff. And that paid me twice what the bank was paying me.
Oof.
So I got interested in looking at what the guys were doing on the assembly benches. Back then, in the mid to late 1980s, when you bought an IBM, when you bought a Hewlett-Packard or a compact computer, it would come in many, many parts in boxes. You had to assemble it. Mm-hmm. So I got myself quite efficient at knocking these things up and being quite good at it. So I stuck that out, and I got various promotions through this particular job. I stuck that out and got more and more involved in the building of the computer equipment. It evolved into working with salespeople to try and explain to customers that were new to computing how the computer might be able to help them. That then evolved into me diagnosing faults remotely over the telephone with a customer. Their computer's gone wrong or they can't get it to work. And there was loads of jokes around at the time about people using CD trays as coffee cup holders. And, you know, the computer doesn't work, and you go through a whole diagnosis process and you find out they've got a power cut. So all these jokes were kind of going around at the time. But a lot of them were kind of based around truths. And I became less involved in the physical assembly of the computer equipment and more involved in the kind of consulting, the working with the customer to diagnose what their needs were, to help them understand what the problem was. It was challenging, but I actually started to enjoy those challenges more and more. If I met a challenge that I hadn't seen before, that was especially enjoyable. Because I'm kind of in a situation now where, a little bit like with the machines that I've been fixing, if it's broken, you've got nothing to lose by trying to fix it. If you can fix it, you get a really good feeling. If you can't fix it, you understand the problem better and you can advise on how the problem might be fixed. And all these skills you see, all these skills through my working life I've built up. And now this has evolved into the business I'm running now.
So you're sort of, it started off as like doing diagnostics on the phone.
Yeah.
For unaware customers.
Yes.
And then sort of by, a series of breaking the problems down to find the solution and then rebuilding it to make it work again. So we're talking about Land Rovers here, aren't we?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's the other thing that used to happen. I get a customer on the phone. I quickly identified the noisier the customer, the more likely it is that they'd known that they'd done something wrong, but they were trying to cover it up. They didn't want their boss to find out they'd broken the computer. So they blamed me. And when eventually you do understand what the root cause of the problem was, you let them know ever so very, very gently that you're onto them. You know exactly what they did. And you can dig them out of this hole. And you're not going to let their boss know.
They must appreciate you.
And everything will be okay. And then people started to appreciate it. Next time you speak to that person, they'll be, okay, Richard, this is what's happened. And I'm in a bit of a mess. Rather than screaming and shouting at me. And very occasionally, if you get someone that, I suppose the most extreme case is you're getting someone you cannot get a word in edgeways, and you're getting someone cursing you, cursing your company, swearing excessively down the phone. You pretend the line had gone dead. Hello, I can't hear you. I could just hear you. And they're bellowing. You got the phone like a foot away from your ear. I can only just hear you. I'm really sorry that I think there's a fault with the line while they're bellowing at you. I'll hang up. I'll give you a call back in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to make some checks at my end. I think my phone's broken. And in the time it takes to do that, and you've hung up, they've vented, they've blown off all that steam. And when you call them back, they're perfectly rational. That was my extreme trick I used to use. As I say, 99.9% of the times, this anger was directed because they'd known that they'd broken something. Now, I don't see it quite so much in cars. I do get it every now and then. Now, I don't get it in my business because I choose the people that I work with, my customers, I choose carefully. Yeah. I'm not interested in people that are not enthusiastic about the machine that they're working with. People need to love that particular car. I don't want someone that's just bought something off eBay. They want me to patch it up and then they want to do a greasy flip and make some money out of it, do a wheeler dealer. I'm just not interested in that kind of owner, because they tend to be, their behaviours will be closer to those angry people I used to deal with on the phone. And I'm bored with dealing with that.
So where was when did the transition actually happen? Because you were obviously doing a job which you, I'd say, almost enjoyed.
Yeah.
You stopped doing that and then you moved into British vehicles, old British vehicles.
Well, it ran alongside. My first car was a 1964 Ford Anglia 105E.
Oh, wow. Harry Potter.
It's a brilliant little car. I bought it off my mate. And this is before they were popular. So they were very common cars on the road back in the mid-1980s. And I bought this off a friend of mine. And it was my first car. And it was 3 or 4 years older than I was. And everyone thought I was absolutely and utterly insane. What are you buying that old thing for? But you know what? It's interesting and it's basic and it's simple and I want to understand it. And I think I can do something with this. I ended up owning that car for about 5 years and I wish I'd never sold it. It was just one of those things. I've got loads of photographs of the work I did on it. But I passed my test. Driving test before I bought this particular car. And I have been interested in cars before, but mainly by watching other people working with them. My interest lay very much in bicycles, lawnmowers, alarm clocks, just nonsense like that. But when I got my own car, then I thought, you know what? I'm going to pull this apart. I'm going to see how it works. My mum came home from work one day and it was on 4 axle stands, her garage that she kept her car in, then had all the running gear of my Anglia in it. She went absolutely nuts at me. She went berserk. She thought I was breaking it up for parts in her house, in her lovely house, nice suburban street in South London. But no, I wanted to take it all apart. I wanted to find out how the engine worked. I wanted to find out the gearbox, get that all sorted out, get it all cleaned, make any welded repairs I needed to do. And I was very enthusiastic about that car. I made lots of mistakes along the way.
Part of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I was to do that car again, I would have done it a completely different way. But, back in the mid-1980s, you were kind of messing around. I think even kind of some of the proper publications out there were suggesting you could braze repair panels onto chassis rails. And screwed up newspaper and filler was an effective MOT repair. And I didn't really do that, but it wasn't far off it. I was trying to improve the thing. Anyway, I ended up, and again, this is while I was living at home, I had a whole collection of cars that I kept buying cars and storing them in lockups all around the area where I lived. So I had like a Rover P6, which I loved. Didn't have that very long, but I bought that. I had another Anglia, which I bought and sold. It never moved a millimetre. I bought it from a car park and sold it on, made a profit out of that one. Probably made a mistake on that. I bought my first Triumph Stag. My brother and my sister, both younger than me, kind of hooked into this. Oh, you can get some interesting old cars for not a lot of money. My sister certainly was very much into Morris Minors. And she absolutely loves, she still does. She she hasn't got the wherewithal to run a Morris Minor because I live too far away from her in order to fix the damn thing all the time. But she bought a 1956 Morris Minor split screen, which I ended up rebuilding the engine, rewiring it, sorting all the, all of the anomalies on that particular car. We bought it cheap. Did all of that. My mum had Triumph TR7, which again, I did all the work. It's a very early Triumph TR7. I did all the work on that. My brother was very much into his Citroen BX. Now that is a complex machine when you start digging under the skin. But it was a great machine, but I'd never ever do another front subframe on a BX Citroen, not a diesel one anyway. But it was all of these cars were around me all of the time. So that's kind of my own hobby was very much, I'd go to work and my fingers would be stained black with the oil and the grease. And this is when I was working in banking.
That must have gone down well.
The manager would drag me over to one side. You need to do something with your hands, Richard. We can't have you in the bank looking like this. Your fingernails were black. So yeah, I did kind of, I had to be a bit more responsible with the work. But at this time also was getting neighbours and friends of neighbours were keen for me to work on their cars too, because they could see, oh, this someone we can use to just do basic servicing on the car. We can, got a noise on the car. I'll take it around to go and see Richard. And I love doing it. I got a really, really good friend of mine, Adrian, who I met while I was working in the bank. I would call him up. My sister in a Morris Minor, she said, it's making a funny noise. So I started up, and it was knocking like a big one. Honestly, it knocked a big end bearing out. It sounded like a big end bearing was rattling around inside the... So I called my mate Adrian up on a Sunday about lunchtime-ish, and I said, look, you need to get the engine out of this Morris Minor. He goes, I'll be around in half an hour. And he was very much like that. We had a collection of friends. We'd drop everything to go and tear each other's cars apart. Someone needed a clutch doing. We'd all convene like next day, lying on like wet pavements, pulling a gearbox off a Avenger or something along those lines. It was just something that I really, really enjoyed as a hobby. Now, so I had a huge collection of cars, which I sold every single one of them, including my Stag, to buy a house, because my dad said, you need to get into property, son. This is where the money is. So I sold all my cars, bought a house, and then we had the big property crash of the early 1990s. I lost everything apart from the house and the mortgage payments. So all of a sudden, I was mortgaged twice the value, twice the market value of the house. But I kept it going, and that curtailed my kind of hobbies for the next 5 or 6 years or so. Ironically, having sold everything to buy that house, I bought my next Triumph Stag just after I sold the house, and I met my missus a week after that. So everything kind of was back in alignment again. I got back into. I bought a Triumph Stag from a chap down the pub when I was incredibly drunk. Which is the best way to buy a Triumph Stag. And it was just, he had all the bodywork done, and it was just crates and crates and crates of parts.
Oh, so it wasn't even one piece?
No. It drove, but it had a seat in it, but nothing else. Engine and gearbox, it drove. But it needed completely assembling, and I thought, this is fun. This is jigsaw for men. This is great fun. I love doing this.
Meccano for grown-ups.
Well, that's it. So I drove it... Next morning, my mate, a good mate of mine, Tim, phoned me up. He said, you promised to buy Lloyd's Stag last night, don't you? Did I? Okay. He goes, yeah, well, you need to at least go and have a look at it. So I went around and looked at it. I thought, this is quite good. How much do you want for this then? And he told me, and I thought, that could work. This is at a point when the classic car market was on the up. It goes up and down all the time. I'm very, very kind of wise to this now. The values, they fluctuate. They fluctuate based on a number of different trends. But in this particular case, I think they were fluctuating because people saw them as an investment. Don't ever invest in a classic car. Not unless the Queen sat in it, or it's a Aston Martin DB4 GT or something along those lines, something incredibly rare, where the supply will never meet the demand. So anything else, buy the thing. And we'll go on to classic cars and ownership at some point, I guess. But anyway, so I bought this car, and my dad sort of like had a look at it. He thought, that's quite nice. I quite like that. And he stumped up half the money for it. And then said, you could pop it in your mother's garage where she keeps her car while you're doing the work on it. Dad, we haven't run this past Mum yet. Anyway, it happened. It happened before Mum came home from work, and of course she went nuts. It's a common theme in my life. But anyway, that car stayed at home. I was living some way away. I was 50, 60 miles away from home at the time. But I ended up getting that car all back together again and ran it around. And of course, being an old car that it done 100,000 miles, I ended up doing an engine rebuild on that, and got back into working with classic cars again. And that was through the 1990s. And into the noughties.
I'm going to jump forward a little bit here, because all those problems and your toils day to day has led to quite a following, because you've since also built your YouTube channel. You've got a great following, an international following. What actually made you start a YouTube channel? Well,
first and foremost, I still absolutely love my job.
Right.
It's something I could see myself doing for another decade. I'm in my late 50s now. I can't see myself... This is the hobby that I've turned into a career, and I still love doing it.
Yeah.
The YouTube channel came around. I had put videos up on YouTube from time to time prior to doing it wholesale as Church House Classics. And at the time, they were just little snippets of things that interested me. A Mazda 787RB rotary Le Mans car starting up. stuff like that, silly things. But as I kind of got into fixing my Stag in the latter days, fixing my Range Rover, I would find myself leaning more and more on this kind of evolving YouTube idea of people showing you how they fix something. None of it was really for entertainment purposes. It was, you want to change a wheel bearing on a Range Rover. I'm not saying, just speaking simplistically, but you want to change a wheel bearing on the Range Rover. And someone would do a 4-minute video. Right, okay, you've got to jack it up. You've got to support it on the stand here. You've got to take the wheel off. Then you can remove the brake caliper. Then you can remove the hub. Then you can remove the bearings. And this is how you push out the inner rake. And it was very methodical, very mechanical. I thought, this is interesting. I got into it with phones. Break the screen on your phone. Well, it's expensive. You take it down to the shop, they want hundreds of pounds to do it. But you can buy the bits and you can do it yourself. So people out there doing instructional videos on how to replace a screen on your phone. Okay, this is interesting. Changing a bearing on a washing machine drum. All these things I kind of looked up on YouTube. Thinking, do you know what? I could do something along these lines. And it actually started out down in Devon, working in my dad's open-fronted barn opposite his house. And I was sitting there, nice summer's evening, and Dad and I were just shooting the breeze. He would often come out, when I was working, he'd come out at the end of the working day with a couple of schooners of gin and tonic. And we'd just sit in the chair watching the sun go down and just chew the fat. It was good fun. And Dad's like, you should put some of these stories up on YouTube. I said, well, okay, I could do that, or I could actually serialise the things that I'm doing here. And rather than just doing a mechanical, step-by-step breakdown of something, let me just go over, right, I've got this car coming into my workshop, and these are the jobs that need doing to it. And while that might seem daunting, this is how I'm going to challenge it. And I tried to not so much push across the step-by-step, this is how you do it, as to, this is a job that needs doing, and this is how I'm going to approach it. And this is how I break that big job down into bite-sized chunks. And then this is how I'm going to get to an end result. I know the end result. I know where I am right now. What I'm going to try and help you guys with is how to go through each step between where we are now, where we want to be. And it started out at that level. Now, the YouTube channel, well, huge sneeze then. It started out really in that open-fronted barn with the swallows and the swifts nesting in the eaves, and it was, and the horses in the fields. And part of me, bless her, part of me, I really missed that environment. It was idyllic. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. There was no background noise. And the early stages of my channel, and people have commented, I prefer the early days of your channel working in that environment than I do you working in your shed, much nearer home, where I'm based now in High Wycombe. But the shed, there's less kind of attraction around the overall environment around it. There's less birds flying in and out. But I think then the following had started. It was very slow to start off with. The real reason for doing the Range Rover stuff was, at the time, I was looking for specific information around very early Range Rovers, building very early Range Rovers, left-hand drive to right-hand drive conversions and so forth. And there was nothing on YouTube. I could fill a gap here. And I wasn't really looking to do it for clicks or for revenue generation or anything like that. I was really, and it remains to this day, is sharing information, sharing knowledge, sharing my theory, or not theory, sharing my kind of understanding. It's only a machine. If it's got fixings, it can be taken apart. If it's broken, you lose nothing by trying to fix it. And it's just pushing that, my own confidence in not being fazed by this particular job, pushing that out, giving other people the confidence that they can do this too. And I think so as far as the channel was concerned, initially, a lot of the work that I was doing within the business, I didn't really serialise a lot of it. There was some that got serialised, but not a lot. It's during the lockdown period we had in 2020. And I'd run out of customer work. We were all locked down, couldn't do anything. I'm down in Devon with my dad, drinking my own body volume in booze, thinking, right, what am I going to do? I know And I pulled the bobtail out of the barn. Now, this was a 1971, June 1971 registered A-suffix Range Rover, which had its original axles, original chassis that had been chopped about, original bulkhead, doors, A-post, B-post and goalpost were all original. Okay, the engine and gearbox had been changed, but then an off-roader had got hold of it, and more or less, I think on its first outing, it got hydrolocked with salt water.
Oh.
So someone had been on the beach with it and just absolutely grenaded the replacement engine. So I had nothing to lose, really, by pulling this thing apart. I think any rational person would have thought, that's a box of barely usable parts there. But it had, I mean, even the windscreen was an original. And when you look at the triplex stamps on it, it was an original 1971 windscreen. So it was quite an original car, very rusty and very incomplete. But it was an original car. And I thought, there's something about this thing that wants to be saved. And I started serialising that. I'm going to unbobtail a bobtail, and I'm going to call it Project Bob.
Yes,
and then,
I remember it well.
That project started out in during the lockdown. And initially, I was going to tear it apart, and I was going to build a decent bobtail. Let's nod to the heritage of chopping the arse end off a Range Rover chassis and make a proper bobtail rather than the mess that we've got here at the moment. And as I started to pull it apart, and I saw that there were more and more original bits on it, and when I scraped the encrusted sand off the chassis rails, there was original black paint underneath it. Mm-hmm. And the chalk marks were on the chassis rails still. The yellow chalk marks were on the chassis from when it was built. Then I found the front chassis rails, the extensions were still, they were in the back of the car. I thought I could weld those back on. And then this plan evolved. Can I put this chassis back up to its original length again? Because enough of the chassis was there and it was solid enough. Could I put this thing back to 100 inch? Could I rebuild this car back to as it would have left the factory, using as much as I possibly can of this original car, but without kind of becoming a slave to it? Because it didn't have its original engine or gearbox. And I'd already fallen foul of not having a complete matching numbers car with the white car I'd done prior, the one I just about got my parts paid for, because that was a matching number car apart from the engine. And that's all people could focus on. Well, it hasn't got its original engine. Yeah, but I'm not charging £250,000 for it. So you could work around the engine, but it's not original. Yeah, but it's not the original engine. So I thought, well, with the bobtail, could I just get this thing back up and running as a two-door Range Rover? So I did get the chassis, and I used my best kind of geometry and trigonometry and Pythagoras and everything else to use the original factory drawings of the chassis to get that chassis back up to its full length, and welded the chassis. The only non-standard weld on that thing would have been a vertical weld just forwards of the rear spring turrets, where I cut the outer half of the chassis and butt welded in a donor section off a later chassis. But the bulkhead on that car was original to it. The A posts were original, the B posts were original. Obviously, I couldn't use the roof line because it had been chopped off. Doors were original to it. Both doors were flat edge doors. I have still got one of the original doors, because what actually happened was, originally I was doing this project for me, just for fun. And I had inquiries from what became a very good customer who was looking for a two-door Range Rover. And it had to be quite a specific requirement he was looking for. He had memories of the early 1970s, Tuscan blue, two-door Range Rover. And that's what he wanted. He wanted it was going to be his forever car. Yeah. And we were just chatting over the phone about all of this. And then it evolved, well, what about Bob? He said, what do you mean, what about Bob? So, well, I'm building it back up as a standard two-door Range Rover. It was Tuscan blue originally. Because it's lost its original engine and gearbox, we can work in that area. He was quite keen on a 5-speed gearbox for modern-day drivability rather than the 4-speed overdrive, which is quite noisy and agricultural. So he wanted a 5-speed gearbox, but it had to be long stick. Well, we could work around that because you've got the Defender, the 110, 90, 110 conversions of the 4-speed gearbox. Sorry, 5-speed gearbox. They put the long stick conversion so the gear stick didn't come up between the seats. So I said, we can do all these things. I can source another Rover V8 for you. We can have whatever interior you want on this car. And he at the time, because I'd done videos of my dad's car, my dad's white A-suffix Range Rover, he said, I really like the interior that's in your dad's car. I said, right, well, that's an in vogue kind of teddy bear interior from a two-door in vogue. He said, well, I really like that. I said, well, that's weird timing because my dad's actually quite keen on getting those covers off and going back to an original Kit Kat type interior. So all this whole thing, the planets aligned on that project. And I did most of the body shell restoration in Devon. And then at that point, that was when my business relocated to the High Wycombe area. And that car then relocated. And the customer's based in North East London. And it gave an opportunity for him to drop in more frequently. But that project then ended up, and I delivered that car to him, and he loves it.
Still drives it.
Yeah, he's got an L322 as well, but he still drives it. Absolutely loves the experience of driving that car. It's got some minor teething problems with it. So the gear stick rattles. There's a centre bearing on that which I need to get sorted out. And there's a couple of other bits and bobs that we're just doing. The project is continuing. I think when you've got these old cars and it's been through such an extensive renovation, especially as inevitably is always a rush for the finish. There are bits that you make do with some particular job. We were fully aware of what was going on, so I agreed with the customer. If we need it by this date, and it was needed for a wedding, then we will need to put these parts back on, which have not been restored yet, but they're good and they're serviceable. But they will need looking at some point in the future. So there are bits like that. But no, he absolutely loved that car. So the bobtail was something that I really enjoyed doing. But then I think because of that, there was a lot of interest then. That and left-hand drive, right-hand drive conversions, because I did one of those. One of my first customers was a nice chap, Tim, bought this particular one, I think it was Spanish. Yeah, the first one was Spanish left-hand drive car that I spent a lot of time in the sea. Because he bought it kind of blind, and it had a 200 TDI in it rather than the VM it would have originally have fitted. But it needed a bit of welding, it needed converting to right-hand drive, and it was 1990, so it had the fuse box on the dash. So it wasn't even as easy as just turning the loom upside down and rewiring the indicators. So it was a bit of a challenge, that one. But he was very good, keen to get the car how he wanted it. No interior whatsoever, no comfort, no creature comforts whatsoever. But he wanted it to be solid, reliable, and right-hand drive, which is exactly what was delivered. But people were interested in this. He's doing things that not many other people are doing. It's what people were thinking about the YouTube. So what have you got next in the workshop, Richard? And the channel really has evolved around not so much, as I said earlier on, not so much this is how you do it, where there are how-to videos, which I push out there, but more about, well, how on earth are you going to kind of deal with this? And I've said it before on the videos, but there's only one way to eat an elephant, one bite at a time.
Very true.
And some of these projects, they're like that. They come in, you think, how on earth are you going to get through this?
Is it also a case, though, that when you're sort of doing your videos, that you get those moments when, I don't know, you take a body panel off and then there's a nice surprise behind it for you, extra work?
There often is, and my business is evolving such that I'll get customers I get an awful lot of inquiries, people asking me how much to do this, how much to do that, and I'll go back. I've had it before where someone wants a wedge of work doing, wants all the brake lines replacing with steel rather than conifer. They wanted it back to original. And there was a huge chunk of work doing. So I went back with quite a competitive estimate. I spoke to a number of other people that I talk regularly to other people who do much the same sort of thing that I do. Spoke to them, so how much would you sort of charge for this sort of thing? They said, yeah, pretty much about the same. So I went back to this particular inquiry, who sat on it for a couple of weeks and then came back to me and said that he's struggling to come to terms with the fact that his cleaner charge is like half as much. Get your cleaner to do it then. I don't understand the logic here. So I do get some people that don't understand the value of what it is that I'm going to offer.
Yeah.
There will always be people like that, always want something doing on the cheap. And while I'll do my best to help and guide them, I don't necessarily want to do that kind of work. I'm not doing things on the cheap. I want to do things properly. The Lincoln Green two-door was a good example of that. The guy that I was working with on that particular project was very keen to keep the patina on the outside of the car, but it had to be solid and rustry on the inside.
Yeah.
The more I dug into that car, the more filler and bodges I found. On the A-post on that car, there was just filler connecting the top half of the A-post to the bottom half. So literally someone had chopped the A-post between the top and bottom hinges and it was full of filler.
Nothing structural in there whatsoever.
Nothing structural in there whatsoever. The B post, the B pillar on the left-hand side of the vehicle was floating against a sill, which had been kind of stick welded. So the whole thing. Now, that car originally came to me, and there is a point behind it. That car originally came to me, get the brakes sorted out, get the engine up and running, and get the electric sorted. And on the face of it, when I was looking over it, on the face of it, it actually looked all right. When I looked in the back of the car, okay, someone's been, creative with some of it. It actually looks quite good. It had been satin black, so you couldn't really see any imperfections. It all looked quite good. But the more I started digging, the more horrors I found. Now, with that particular case, had I known how bad that body shell was before I started that job, I would have strongly advised starting with a different car.
Yeah.
That car, before I started working on it, was a wreck.
Yeah, but neither you nor the customer knew that, right?
No. Now, I'm wiser to this now.
But how does the customer react when you then go back and say, by the way, half your car's missing?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I give an estimate. I don't work fixed price on anything, because you never know what bodges have been done over the last 50 years of the car's life. And typically, they will have been looked after the first 3, 4, 5 years of their lives. And then they would have been run a budget for the next decade, then on a shoestring after that. So by the time I get hold of these cars, the majority of them, they have challenges. They're needing lots of work. So the estimate gets drawn up based on my experiences of doing a job like that in the past. So I'll say to them, look, this is roughly how much time I think I'm going to need here. These are the parts that I think I'm going to need. But these are the risks. And this is, again, very much my project management background here. These are the risks of what we might face here. As soon as I know that we're going to breach that estimate, we'll be having a conversation. I'm not going to spend your money without you saying, yeah, I'm happy with that. So pretty much every single car that comes through my workshop, it needs extra things doing to it. Let me
ask you a question there, because I mean, you're highly experienced with the two-door classic Range Rover. If a car comes in and a customer now would say to you, right, I just need this and this and this doing, do you actually say, okay, you want that doing, but do you realize, and then you point out things which are basically invisible to him and said, this is going to need doing too?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, I do. I'll talk to them about that. So the car that's in the workshop at the moment, there's a four-door 1990s Range Rover that's been painted, retro painted in a very, very similar shade to Lincoln Green. Nice car, left-hand drive. It's got a world of challenges around the electrics, around the suspension, around the brakes. And it's difficult to know. With something like this, my challenge is that before I start a project, and it's the question that should never be asked, what's your budget? Because if people don't know me, they'll be thinking, well, what's your budget? Well, obviously, you're just going to spend that money. No, I need to know whether you can afford for me to start picking at the edges on this car. Because when I start picking at the edges on this car, I'm going to find things that I can't foresee.
Yeah.
But they need doing. Now, there's one thing I won't do is I won't bodge. So if I find something that is wrong, that's going to leave that car in a dangerous state, then I'm not going to put it back to the way when it came in, because I'm not going to put it back on the road with that dangerous fault in it.
No.
So the conversation then is with the customer, you've got a problem with the brakes or with the suspension or whatever that's dangerous, it needs fixing. This is how much I'm going to charge to do that. And it's not about me finding ways to spend customers' money, because I'll be doing a job that we'd already agreed that I will be looking at.
Yes.
So the current car that's in wanted me to reinstate ABS on it. Fantastic, I can do that. I can reinstate the ABS. Most of the wiring appears to be in there. We're just missing the main components in the engine bay. But when I dug down to it, and although all the brake lines are fairly solid on it, when I dug down into it, the calipers on the front end of the car, two of the pistons were seized up solid. One of the back calipers wasn't working at all. Well, I'm not going to do anything on that before those calipers have been replaced or refurbished.
Sure. So
it's that kind of scenario I'm talking about here. So although I'm just reinstating ABS, it ended up with a complete brake overhaul, all four corners, and new pads. I mean, the discs are good and serviceable on this. So it does happen. And it's a challenge, I think, sometimes when a car comes in, to first and foremost subtly find out what the budget might be on this.
No, I get that. I mean, I've seen it so many times that you look at a car and it's, on face value, it might look fairly solid. But once you get underneath the skin and you see that there are real problems, and even though from a material point of view, it might not be that expensive, but there's still going to be a lot of time involved.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm very generous with my time as well. I tend to round the hours down and not up. I'm a terrible business person. I really am. I make enough money to run the business, but I don't operate like, let's say, a main dealer might. Well, they just have fixed prices on it, and you're paying for the white lab coats and the painted white floors in the workshop. I tend to attack a problem as efficiently as I possibly can. And if I am finding myself learning new skills, so with the air suspension reinstatement I did on a 300 TDI soft dash, when I reinstated the air suspension on that, there was a wedge of me learning about the air suspension on that. I don't charge for that.
Right. Other
people are saying, well, you should do, because the customer gets the end result of it. Yeah, but then I don't charge the next customer. Now I've got the knowledge, I don't charge the next customer for it either. So it becomes skills. So I don't charge for me learning on the job. And if I'm faced with something particularly horrible, back right at the infancy of my business, I had a 1994 hard dash Range Rover V8 that had an intermittent stalling problem. And when it stalled, there was just no reason why it wouldn't restart again. I spent days on that, trying to understand what the problem was. And in the end, it was inside the distributor, on the electronic module. There's two wires come off the electronic module and go to a plug on the side, which the amplifier plugs onto. Those wires were just very, very, very slightly stretched.
Okay.
So the wire kind of had a plastic guide that it went through, and it was kind of pulled more to one end of the guide than the other. So, and the reason I found this was that when I put another distributor in, and of course it worked straight away, started straight up, because I bought a distributor off eBay. Thought, I was going to put another distributor in, and of course it fired straight up. No problems at all. Well, that is weird. Now I started then to divert all because we're talking about an EFI car. We don't know whether the problem's fuel related, ignition related. We don't know whether it's ECU, injectors, airflow meter, throttle positions. And all of that was all learning, me understanding how an EFI system works. Now, I don't know everything about a hot wire EFI system now, but I'm much better geared now to sort problems out with an EFI system than I was then. So we got to the end of it all and realised that it was just these two wires inside the distributor, which is unrelated to the ECU, the EFI, and everything else. It's completely isolated from the management of the car. But what was happening was, as the engine started, the vacuum drew, pulled the base plate sideways and just stretched these wires just a fraction of an inch. And what then had happened over a period of time, it worn through the insulation, and under certain circumstances, it was causing a short to earth. So the amplifier wasn't receiving the signal from the module. So at the end of it all, we got it fixed. Days and days and days of my time and head scratching. And I think I billed the customer about 2.5 hours for it.
Yeah, that's something which an outsider won't understand.
No. And it often happens that way. And stuff does go on in the workshop. I'll get to the end of a day in my workshop and it's been a particularly challenging day.
Yeah.
And I think I've been in there 9 hours. And I've been working flat out for 8 of those. I can't bill 8 hours for that work. And this, again, terrible business person. So I'll come to kind of, in my head, what do I think that job's worth? Because I might not have been as efficient, let's say, as a Land Rover mechanic. A main dealer. I might not have been as efficient as that fully trained up person, because they've already got all the information in their head. I might have had to reach the manual a couple of times. Yeah. I might have had to reach the parts guide a couple of times, because those parts numbers aren't on the tip of my tongue. I think the biggest area, though, for me is where I've not recognised the fault's been caused by a poor quality part that was already on the car when it's arrived. And this is why my aggression, my anger towards poor quality parts still being sold open in the marketplace annoys me, because it just costs people like me time and money. And it costs the customers inconvenience having the car off the road because the part's not up to the right quality, not up to the right standard. Yeah.
I've got a question for you. If we roll back an awfully long time, your sort of natural inquisitiveness took you from bicycles, alarm clocks and lawnmowers through your Ford Anglia, through Triumph Stags to classic two-door Range Rovers, which were all, I'd like to say, simple vehicles, no computers. And now you're dealing with more complex vehicles, air suspension and ECUs, computers in vehicles. Is there a cut-off point for you where you say, I'll cope with advancing technology to this point, but I won't repair or embark on a project of a later vehicle?
Absolutely. When I first set the business up, it was just going to be Range Rovers.
Yeah.
Classics. Originally, I didn't really want to go into soft dash classic, which was the run-out version of the Range Rover Classic. I also quite keen on working with Series 2s and 3s.
Right.
Mainly because Dad had a Series 2A, and Triumph Stags, because I've got one of those. I've had it since 1994. So that was the original idea. Now, the business has evolved now. As far as Land Rovers, Range Rovers is concerned, I cut off still at 1995, which is the end, or 1996, I guess, right at the end of the Range Rover Classic production. I draw a line. Okay?
Right.
I will draw the line at the end of the Series 3 production, 1981, 82. I have not been involved in 90s or 110s.
Right.
And I really am not keen on working on Defenders. I have worked on a Freelander, never again. Freelander 2, really nice machine. Oh my God, they're bastards to work on, pardon the expression.
We're real people.
So the cutoff point still, logically, I'm not so bothered about the computers. So the computer on the Classic for the ECU is dead easy to work with. I use some proprietary kind of open source software, Rover Gauge, and a cable to see what the ECU is doing. It's easier to work with Rover Gauge than it is to work with a multimeter. So from that perspective, I'm quite happy to work with ECUs on Range Rover Classics. The air suspension ECU, very much the same thing. It's a very, very simple and basic thing to work with. Where I don't like getting involved, I prefer carburetors to an EFI system because I can understand them and I can fix them. I don't like anything with an ODB port.
Right.
Because I think the market is totally flooded with people that do like working with things with ODB ports.
Yeah.
So I don't need to compete in that market sector. One of the first things that kind of got me back into thinking, do you know what, I could do something here in the automotive industry. The carburetors, Stromberg carburetors on my Stag were misbehaving, and I bought another pair of carburetors. I couldn't find anybody to tune them up for me. And we're talking noughties, so 2005, 2006. Could not find anybody, even local run garages. No one was prepared to go near them.
Right.
And I thought, well, it can't be this difficult. And with basic tools and a basic understanding, and again, pulled them apart, understood how they worked, understood how a carburetor works with the inlet vacuum and so forth, and was able to tune them up myself. So the area of the market I'm working in now, it is a growing market. It is a growing area. More and more people seem to be getting involved in it. It's the bits where you can't just plug a computer in.
Yeah.
It's the bits where you need to have a bit of mechanical understanding, a bit of knowledge around these systems. So I guess to answer your question, where do I draw the line? That's it. The line is something that doesn't need computers to plug in to fix it predominantly.
Right.
Although I will deal with the entire Range Rover Classic range from start to end. I get lots of people inquire with me about Defenders, about Discovery 2s, and so forth. It's not me. And I think that those areas in the marketplace, they're still well serviced. I get a number of people say to me, I really should do Range Rover, the second generation, the P38. I really should do those because there's less and less people that are keen to work on P38s. For me, it's something that would interest me, but there's enough Range Rover Classic, Series Land Rover kind of work out there for me to fill my year, really.
Yeah.
I've had a few Triumph Stags in this last year. There's more Triumph Stags coming in this year. I've got 3 cars booked in for work before Easter. So there's that element. I've got an MG Midget in the workshop at the moment, which I've really enjoyed working with.
That's nice.
It's 1979. It's one of the last 100 cars that was built, apparently. I had an MGB in, which I've known this particular car since I was 18. But that car had been off the road since 2000 and stored sensitively. So it wasn't rusty, but it hadn't started since 2000, and that was fairly extensive recommissioning. It needs a new loom, desperately needs a new loom. But stuff like that, it's I don't go hard and fast on what cars I want to work with anymore. It's more about well, that's interesting. I fancy having a go at that.
So you've moved away from the original founding decision to work on the Range Rover Classic, but it's still with British Classics.
Still with British Classics, yeah. I had a customer contact me a couple of years ago now. He was doing a nut and bolt. Well, wasn't doing. He had commissioned a nut and bolt restoration on a Rover P6. So he bought the car. He wanted it to be a show car. Mm-hmm. Bought the car. It was being delivered back to his garage as a bare body frame with a suspension, engine and gearbox in there. He knows the standard that he wants it finishing to, and he's quite happy sourcing the bits, but I had absolutely no idea how to get there.
Right.
So I spent most of last year working, in my spare time, working in his garage, rebuilding that car with him. And I'm going to do a video on my YouTube, really. I'm just going to do, because I didn't video any of it at the time. I don't know why I didn't video any of it. I probably should have videoed it. I stuck it up on YouTube because there's a lot of P6 interest out there, Rover P6 saloons. But because it was his garage, it was my spare time, I thought, just go and have some fun putting this car back together again. And I will have a chat with him about that. But that was something that really interested me. It was a nice person to work with. And that for me now is becoming half the job, is finding the right person to work with. Yeah. And the right car that interests me. And there's enough out there to say, I'm busy for the first 6 months of this year now, fully booked up.
That's nice.
Which is not, yeah, it's good for the business.
Yeah. Here's another question for you. And this is sort of a bit close to my heart. Have you ever had to prepare a classic Range Rover for travelling, for overlanding? Have you ever done anything in that direction?
I've done long distance driving, but not particularly. I've used my own Range Rover for mild off-road kind of work.
Right.
I've gone, because it's my road car. I didn't particularly want to go green laning where I'm likely to get the sides scratched and so forth. But mild off-roading, I've been to pay-and-play sites and so forth in my own car. As far as longer journeys, not particularly. I've prepared my own car for family holidays to the south of France and so forth.
Yeah.
And I've worked... I guess advised people on things that they might want to consider when it comes to parts that they might need to take with them on a longer journey. So what parts of a classic Range Rover might cause you problems, let's say on a couple of 1,000-mile journey, into not so much hostile territory, but territory away from a dealer that might be able to sell you the used part or new part to fix it. So yes, I've worked in those sort of areas, if that answers the question.
A little bit, yes.
Go on then.
No. I think it's because how should I put this? Maybe it's just because I'm getting slightly older that, until now I love my Series 2A 109 station wagon beyond belief. I love the fact that it's, touch wood, never let me down. It's always got me to where I wanted to go and back again. But I've now got a classic Range Rover 2-door, which I want to prepare for a longer expedition. And I suppose, the question really was, have you done something like that before? If yes, maybe we can turn that into a future episode of discussing, the way forwards for that. But also, I look at the classic Range Rover with the V8 engine in it as being a solid vehicle, a simple vehicle, one which I can repair in the field. And I suppose I was kind of looking for your opinion that maybe saying, no, don't do that.
I'm not going to give you that opinion.
You see, then that's fine. Then we're in the same
machine for it. It is a perfect machine for it. As you say, the Range Rover Classic, especially in the early form, in the 2-door form, it is a very simple machine to work with. The biggest challenges that we've got here will be rust in the UK. The body frame's solid and it's together. And the parts that have gone into it are of the correct specifications. There's no reason why that car shouldn't be reliable.
Yeah,
I've run my own. So I ran my first Range Rover Classic was a 92 4-door Vogue. I put 40,000 miles on that in 2 years, and it let me down once. Right at the end of its its existence, it was a very, very, very tired machine, and it had a number of challenges. One of which was the engine. One of the cylinder liners had dropped in the engine, so it had a constant kind of potential for it to suddenly pressurise the cooling system with little warning, and that's what killed it eventually.
Right.
It was a rusty car, though. It was not the best example of a Range Rover. The one that replaced it is the car I've still got currently, sitting languishing in the corner of my workshop. It needs some rust repairs doing to it, predictably, but that's been off the road for the last 4 years. But prior to that, I'd done the best part of 170,000 miles in that.
That's a long way, yeah.
With one letdown, one recovery of shame, and that was when the starter motor packed up on me. And because it's an automatic, we had no way of starting it. So rather than working in the pouring rain, and I was only 50 miles from home, the recovery company just took me home. I changed the starter motor next morning in an hour, and it was back up and running again.
Yeah.
So I think with a lot of these things, and the earlier the Range Rover, the easier this becomes, is preventative maintenance. I like to think I've got a good level of mechanical sympathy. So if the car starts to do something which is outside of its normal behaviour, I start to kind of work out what that is, if odd noise somewhere or a rattle. They all rattle, they all make odd noises, but it's what's not normal, what's the sudden change of behaviour, and then just diagnosing that and working your way through to analyse what those problems are. There's no reason why they can't be reliable. Jeremy Clarkson campaigned a Range Rover Classic, four-door Range Rover Classic in South America. Was that South America? That was South America, wasn't it?
I think so.
And it was the car that won the show. It was absolutely, it did everything he wanted it to. Okay, it let him down because it's a TV show, and there's certain things that happen on those shows that are entertaining. But when I watched that show, I had no doubt whatsoever in my mind that car would not finish that journey. And what I often find certainly with the Range Rover, and I found it overall, I've been owned Range Rovers for nearly 20 years now, it's when you start modifying them away from their original design, the more modifications that go into those cars, the more unstable they become.
I think that's fair to say for just about any vehicle which comes out of a factory. The more you change it, the more you're pushing the envelope in sense of limitations.
And I think, a 2-inch lift, great if you're rock climbing and so forth, but you don't need it. You don't need some of these modifications, some of these more hardcore modifications. You don't need them for the majority of uses that you might put in an overland trip. Green laning, for instance, a bog standard Range Rover Classic out of the box will achieve most things that you want to do green laning. Okay, decent set of all-terrain tyres. You don't need chunky, great, excessively large comedy swamp tyres.
No.
Absolutely bog standard. They will do an awful lot more than most people seem to think they'll do.
I think I keep saying this, in many discussions which I've had in the past, that if you roll the clock back to, I don't know, the 50s, 60s, people were taking standard vehicles and doing journeys which even today would be very challenging. But in the simplest of vehicles, whether it be the London to Singapore with the Series 1 Land Rovers, or the Cape Cold to Cape Hot Richard Pape in an Austin saloon car, through the toughest parts of Africa. Yeah, he did some underbody protection, but it was a standard car. So I think, there's a lot of kit which you can buy today, which, as you say, lifts, huge tyres, etc. But do you really need it? And was the car built to cope with that? Big questions.
In the Americas campaign that was done by the Army in Darien Gap specifically,
yes,
they identified the root cause of their consistent, continual differential brakes as being the swamp tyres that they put on that vehicle. And when they moved back to a tyre size much closer to the original design, they were able to cover more ground with less failure.
Yeah.
I just read the book on that. It's been a very, very interesting book. All these experiences, I think the Range Rover itself is quite a sturdy and tough machine. Very, very simple, very basic. Yeah. It's unfortunately picked up a reputation in the late 80s, I guess, for being unreliable. But I don't think the reliability was particularly mechanical. I think the reliability was down to the fact that the door windows don't always wind up and down as fast or as same speeds as they should. Perhaps there's a rattle from underneath the car that the main dealer can't identify. And because of that, people then deemed that, it's not built to a Mercedes or 1980s Mercedes standard.
Sure.
And so therefore it's unreliable. But I think mechanically they are they're a well-proven mechanical setup.
I believe so, yes.
I think it's a great idea. I think it's a really good idea.
Well, then we're going to have plenty to talk about then moving forwards, because that project is about to get underway at this end. So I'm sure I should be asking you lots of questions.
Well, you know where I am.
And I will video it so I can share my trials and tribulations as we go through it.
Yeah, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be as reliable or as capable as your Series 2A station wagon. I think with the right level of understanding and the right preparation, even standing out of the box.
We will get there, definitely. Richard, I'm going to call today to an end. I think we've got at least a couple of topics coming up in the not too distant future where we can continue our conversation. Thank you very much for today. I certainly suggest that people wander over to your YouTube channel, Church House Classics, and just absorb all that information which you're putting out there. And I wish you a lot of luck for this year. You're already quite well booked out anyway. So I look forward to seeing the new episodes. And yes, Richard, let's catch up again very, very soon.
Indeed. Pleasure to talk. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the At Overland Europe podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and download our app for more adventures and exclusive content. Remember, you can find our guest social media and websites linked in the description below. Until next time, safe travels.